Welcome back to the Sim Geeks podcast. We are your hosts, William Belk and David Schablock. We are joined today by the one, the only Matt Charnetski, and I am going to give him a few minutes. He's not been with us before, so we want to make sure he has time to introduce himself. So tell us your background, tell us what you do in simulation, and where everything's kind of come from for you.
But first, what I do is I always tell people, I'm like, because being our positions, we've done a lot of weird things, a lot of odd, different things. And we have a very unique background. And how I describe Matt to pretty much anybody that's never met him, I'm like, he makes us look normal. So give us the story, the short story, because it's good ones.
Sure. So there's kind of, I guess there's three pathways. There's academic, there's geographic, and there's professional, right? So academic, I went to majored in biology at a small liberal arts college in my hometown. I moved 4 blocks to go to college. It becomes important that I only moved 4 blocks to go to college later in the story. Then I got my paramedic certificate a number of years later. Followed a few years after that by my master's in medical simulation at Drexel. And now I'm currently working on my PhD at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. So that's academically. And geographically, I grew up in Iowa, a little town in central Iowa. Went to Africa my senior year of college, got bit by the bug of traveling and seeing the world. Whole other series of misadventures will save you the story. I moved to Antarctica for 7 years, off and on, not the entire time. 52 months of ice time over those 7 years. Then I moved back to Iowa for a while, about 8 years. Then shortly towards the end of that time was when I fell into simulation. Then I moved to Kazakhstan for almost 2 years.
Because why not?
Great, like you do. Then I moved back to the States, but I moved to Northeast Arkansas, which I routinely kind of joked around that at least we would have the same alphabet even if we didn't speak the same language. And then about a year and a half ago, I moved to New Hampshire. So that's the rounding out of the geography of it. And then professionally, lots of different stuff in Antarctica, logistics, did search and rescue a little bit there, was a field safety training person for just a brief time at the end. Came back to the States, was working as an EMT, thought, well, this is fun, but it's kind of boring. I'd like to be a paramedic, but I couldn't afford a paramedic school, so I talked my way into electronic medical records at the beginning of meaningful use. So I did project management and implementation to pay for paramedic school. Finished that up, was a critical care paramedic in central Iowa for a bunch of different services like we paramedics do. Had a fabulous time, but slowly that was destroying my soul. Mostly just for hours, I didn't have the scary experiences lots of people do. And then I fell into a job in sim, which is an interesting story all by itself, but I fell into my first job in sim. I was a sim specialist at an osteopathic medical school. And was really fortunate to be surrounded by a bunch of people who were really into sim. And from the first moment I got into it, just my interview was supposed to be 30 minutes. I believe it was almost 5 hours when I finally left. And I thought, this is cool. I want to do this for the rest of my life. Shortly after that, my boss brought me a little postcard and said, hey, I know you were thinking about a master's. Drexel is offering its first class. You should check it out. Jumped into that halfway through my master's. I wanted to start implementing that stuff. And as a specialist, I wasn't in that organization. I wasn't really in a position to do that. And so I made a really big jump and took what some people have referred to as the job to get the job, where I moved to Kazakhstan and jumped from specialist to founding director of a American-style medical school. Helped set up a sim center there, which was a fascinating project and a whole other set of stories. Came back to the States for my second director position with NYIT at their Northeast Arkansas campus. Did a lot of standardized patient stuff, which I hadn't done a ton of there. Nice. And then wrapping that up, I started looking to see what was next, and it was either Virgin Islands or New England, and I picked New England. And now I run a hospital-based program up there for Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center.
Matt, I've known you for a minute. Not as long as a lot of your people, but I've known you for a minute. And even in that story, I learned about 2 things I didn't know. Jesus. I've got a background that's pretty interesting. Nothing compared to that. But moving on.
All right, so this is going to be fun, right?
Yeah.
So I did notice we have something in common. I also spent time in Arkansas, as well as... So I was on the border, western Arkansas, Fort Smith area, as well as eastern. It is...
no offense to any of my Northeast Arkansas people.
No,
it has pretty parts.
All offense meant. It's okay. And then I spent a handful of years in eastern Oklahoma, right on the Arkansas border on the Pogo side. And that is the 6 years of my life I will never get back. Like, that's...
It was Oklahoma.
No, I will say I was surprised at how much good I did find in Arkansas, and it did surprise me. I will admit my own bias going into it. Really interesting people, super interesting project. A state that is I say accidentally progressive. They have a physician shortage that's like 20 years ahead of everybody else. They did some really interesting things to try and bring more physicians in, and a couple of osteopathic schools popped up.
Yep.
Lots of cool stuff going on there. Some fabulous people doing some really good sim. But
You loved it there.
I did. I will say that no one will ever be able to tell me that they have bad mosquitoes wherever they are, because when you live amongst rice fields, it's a different.
You brought up the osteopathic schools that just opened up down there. I guess my oldest cousin just graduated from that first class at the one in Fort Smith.
Oh, really?
So he's originally from Oklahoma. He went to medical school there. He's starting his residency. Well, just started, I guess.
That's awesome.
Month, right? Yeah,
That's awesome.
You're right. A lot of stuff has popped up. I give Oklahoma, Arkansas a hard time, and it's well deserved in a lot of areas.
Sure.
I joke that it's time I'll never get back, but it made me do dumb shit. So I lived in Oklahoma. There's no mountains to climb. There's no snow to ski on. And so I had to start doing things for entertainment, like running. I mean, it was like my Forrest Gump moment, right? Like I just decided to go running one day, and I just didn't stop.
Is that the chicken story that we won't get into now?
The chicken story came from even before that. That happened in Wyoming, and we need to have that story one night because we told it
another time.
Ghost last year. And we had a good time with it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
All
Let's do
right,
that another time. That's just a teaser.
So let's talk about what we're going to do today. So
stay tuned.
This episode, it has the potential to piss a few people off or to potentially become something that some people may be a bit offended by.
And that's not what we want.
It's not the intent, and we're doing our best here. But what we're going to talk about today is kind of the evolution of Simtech versus SimOps specialists, where we've been with that realm, as well as where we're headed, right? So what's the difference between the two? And understanding one of the first things that we've all agreed upon is title isn't nearly as important as responsibility, right? So just because your title says Simtech doesn't mean you're not an ops specialist or vice versa. And so we're going to jump in and talk about a few things today. And we, all three at the table, have something in common. I think this might be the first all paramedic episode of the Sim Geeks podcast. Which
That's
is
actually a bit of a surprise. I really would have thought that there had been...
Not yet.
It's funny how many EMS people have branched into simulation. And I have theories as to why.
Me too.
We'll have to get to it at a different time.
And that's why when I pitched this episode, you were like, no.
Yeah, we're not touching it.
When I pitched this the first episode, you were like, no, we're not doing that at all.
So let's talk about why, right? So initially David said, hey, let's have this episode. And I initially said, no, I don't want to touch it. I said it has too much EMT versus paramedic vibe for me, right? Where we end up with the whole ambulance driver thing, or hey, what's a technician versus a clinician? And that is a very touchy subject for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, I think a lot of people come into Sim because we're looking for something beyond being a paramedic. Not that there's anything wrong with spending your career as a paramedic. I have, right? For sure. I've my entire career. But we do hit a ceiling. You either go flight or you go into management or you find another career field. That tends to be kind of where we end up. And I think a lot of people have. You said medical school. I know several paramedics and EMTs that work in medical schools doing simulation.
Well, and go to medical school.
The career path for paramedics, there aren't a lot of steps to it.
Exactly.
Right? You're a paramedic, maybe you're some sort of supervisor, and that field gets so much narrower, right?
Absolutely.
I worked for an ambulance service that had, 90 paramedics, I think, that worked for it. We had 4 lieutenants. We had 3 deputy chiefs. We had a chief. That was the end of that path. Not all 90 of us can become lieutenants.
Yeah.
And so then your options are leave or stay or maybe progress into those limited things.
Even as much as you love it, even as much as you passionately want it, it's just, it happens.
Absolutely. And I mean, being a paramedic, most places is a physical job. Yeah. And so there is a time limit on it, and that time limit's going to be different for each of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked with 70-year-old paramedics that shocked me and 26-year-olds that I thought were about to fall apart.
Yes. Totally.
So for this one here, what we're looking at, specifically the difference really comes down to technician or operations specialist, right? That's what we're looking at. I guess you could argue technologist in there somewhere as well.
And there's coordinator. There's so many other terms that I don't even know how they fit in. You could probably tell me better. But really, for this episode, I really wanted to talk about the difference between a Simtech and a SimOps specialist. And really, this came out of my experiences. I was hired into this industry. I mean, I will say, I got my paramedics license to get a job in sim. It was basically, I was in this pit of retail hell, and somebody that I formerly knew came up to me and said, "You know the thing we used to do as kids? And I used to be in Civil Air Patrol, did search and rescue, set up ground teams, search and rescue schools. We would set up scenes with blood and guts and make simulation back then." And so I was like, "Well, yeah." He says, "I get paid for that now." And I'm like, "What?" And he set up a path to do it. And it was not even supposed to go as quick or as the way it was supposed to go, but it did. And I was hired as a Simtech. And as I knew it, I was, when I started out, a setup, tear down, make it work sort of guy. And that's, I started as that because I didn't know my butt from a hole in the ground, And I remember going to my CHSOS prep course, and I went there, and I had pretty much just been in my sim center. I hadn't branched out. My boss, he's the smartest man I know. I'm going to have him on for one of the episodes. But it was more of, he was that military, eyes on your task, do your job sort of thing. So it was really my first interaction up in Michigan. And one of my classmates, I said, "Well, I'm just Simtech." And he's like, "Whoa, no. You're a SimOps specialist." And again, me knowing nothing at that point, especially about anything outside my sim center, I'm like, "What? No, you're a SimOps specialist." I'm like, "No, I'm just a Simtech. Is that a problem?" And it was this ludicrous. And I was like, "Why can't I call myself a Simtech?" And you have to understand. And it was brought to me as it has to do with payment, and it has to do with paying somebody a certain level in hospitals and how a tech gets paid versus a specialist. And I kind of said, "Oh, okay, well, that's not really my problem." And I went back to my sim center where it was there. And at the time, I didn't understand.
Sure.
And since then, I understand. Sure. And I get it. And that's why I wanted to kind of say, and there are going to be people listening that do a SimOps specialist job, and they're called a Simtech. And that's different, and that is a fight unto themselves. But
I think the first thing I bristled at, actually, when you told that story, was when you said just a Simtech.
Correct.
That was my problem. Simtech, whatever you want to be, right?
I know.
We've got fabulous examples. We've got Scott Crawfords of the world. This guy's, I think, official title now is Associate Professor and Executive Director of a large sim program, right? Self-described as a Simtech to this day. And please be, you are not a Simtech, but human. Simtech, right?
Oh, I know.
Not even the Simtech. Right? It's the Plato's ideal.
Yeah, Scott is great.
But and then you have other people like Billy Pascal who dyed in the wool Simtech. Will always describe Simtech.
Which you say, when you say not just a Simtech, I immediately go to my thing where I mess with her all the time, where she's saying not just a Simtech. And so it's out of love, because I love Billy Pascal. Sure. It's always, "Well, I'm just a Simtech." She's like, "Shut up. Shut up."
But it's that just a part, right? That's a problem. Yeah. Now, when it comes to the job title thing, I think that's such an interesting problem. And what I've found with all the different places I worked. So I came into it as a sim specialist.
Yeah.
There was no conversation. There were not techs. We had a simulation technology specialist.
Okay.
Right, who was kind of the IT guy, tinkerer for the department. Now I have a simulation technology technician, which is a goofy title that I don't know what to do with. But but at the end, there's places in Boston where they are called simulation engineers.
Whoa.
Right, and so the title thing, that's just going to be governed by your organization, and you're going to put together a job description, and you will take it to them, and whatever tools you use to build that, whoever's job description you've stolen, they are then going to tell you what you get to call it.
We talked about this earlier. We talked about earlier about how it's basically plagiarism a lot of times, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
And in case you haven't figured out, we are still in Phillip Wortham's office at SimOps 2021 recording this.
Plagiarizing his office.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Right. We stole it.
So,
but I think that's something that when we get caught up in those titles, then we end up fighting the wrong fight.
Okay.
And so when we look at the progression from tech to specialist, if we want to call it a progression, right, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. But the reason I would call it that is, with a technician, you're absolutely right. There are some pay connotations that come with that. There are just some in the healthcare world, not even just hospitals, right? Technicians are considered to be kind of an entry-level position for lots of things. If you're an EKG tech, you are obviously not a cardiologist.
Correct.
But that's not to demean what the tech does. The tech is essential.
Essential.
In sim, up until recently, which we can get into all sorts of conversations about education and training and things like that. But up until recently, the only way that you could come to sim was accidentally from some other job, right? So you came with some skill set, whether it was a clinical background, whether it was IT, whether it was theater, whatever you want to pick. But you came with
pillars I talk about.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And because you had to come from there, we had to have a mechanism to get people in the door. Because you're not going to be able to go to a medical school and say, hey, we've got this theater guy and we want to bring him in to run these things, right?
Yeah.
And so by having that technician role, we have an opportunity to create that in a space where the requirements are relatively low. It lets us find people that have those varied backgrounds, those incredible skill sets, have something about them that we just think, I want to work with that person. And we can teach them the other stuff. We know how to get them that experience. And then we can grow them into whatever else they become, whether it becomes a sim coordinator, whether it becomes an educator, again, whatever the title is. But when we grow into a sim specialist, to me, where that becomes, we are specialists in simulation, but we're specialists in that we are generalists, right? That we have that truly unique combination of skill sets. I talk to people about the work that we do, that we have done, and people just can't wrap their head around it. Right? They latch onto one little piece and they're like, oh, right, robots, right?
Right?
Like, well,
dolls.
Dummies, right?
Mannequins with a Q.
That's right. But
so you set up store displays.
Right. But because that's such a specialized skill set, and I will argue all day long that simulation operations is becoming a freestanding profession.
Yes.
The body of knowledge, the required skills, the volume of just stuff you have to deal with is making it into its own profession. Because of that, we have to have that progression until we get to a point where reliably someone can say, I want to go to EMT school. I want to go to paramedic school. I want to go to sim specialist school or operations school, right?
And that's right there.
There's programs starting and programs exist and programs trying to exist.
And that's what that's kind of where I see that differentiation, right? That is basically it's the development of recognized professional education where you're not coming in as something else or someone else who also knows something about sim or learned how to run the mannequin because of your other job and now you want to make it full time. You're someone who set out and said, I want to do that for a career, and I'm going to get there by going to this school or this program or these certification programs. And you that doesn't mean you can't bridge from one to the next. Doesn't mean you can't go from tech to ops specialist. But somebody could come out of high school. That's our marketing right now. We could get people basically hooked in high school on this idea, and they don't go be an EMT and then eventually wind up in a sim center. They come right out and say, I'm going to be a sim specialist.
And I think
I want a whole nother episode on how do we attract people to this industry and how do we make them? Because I'm telling you, it's like, I tell people all the time, this is the best job nobody ever knew existed.
Right.
Sorry, go.
No. I completely agree. And I think that's where, so the only way I fell into sim, right? The only way I became a sim specialist out of the gates, we've discussed a little bit of my background, but truly, this job description that was put together, when I came into sim, I didn't even know what sim was. Right. Yeah. With a lot of help from some very wonderful people, I got a lot of research, I got a lot of information, and I prepared for that interview like no other interview.
Right.
But coming into it, what they had asked for in their job description, they had all the normal stuff. I want somebody who can work in a dynamic environment. I want, somebody who can troubleshoot, these kinds of things. But the things that stuck out and the things that made this job pop up on Indeed for a human like me, they wanted somebody with 5 years of patient care experience, with paramedics being preferred. Yep. And
it's because we're cheap. Let's admit it, right?
That is a piece of the puzzle. But in addition to the healthcare experience, and someone with 5 years of IT experience, with healthcare IT being preferred. I looked at that job description and I thought, I don't know for the life of me what simulation is. But at the very least, there are maybe 3 of us in the Midwest that are going to meet these requirements, and we will be friends. Yeah. If nothing else, I will meet these people and be like, hey, buddy, and then I went in, and from the very first digital rectal exam and my first meeting of Noelle, who's a very nice lady, just coming across all that stuff, I thought, this is the weirdest, coolest thing I've ever done.
Absolutely.
Yep. So, talking about the positions and, Simtech, Sim Operations Specialist, where was it and where do you see it going?
I think it's going to continue to evolve as a profession, and it's going to continue to find its way to be freestanding. And one of the things I talk to anyone who will listen about is in that professional development realm for simulation operations, technicians, specialists, engineers, coordinators, whatever. For all those people, not only do we have to gather all the operations information, but we do also have to go to that neighboring stuff, the education, the administration, all those things, because what sim operations really is, and this is one of my favorite words that people apparently don't use often, but it is one of the most interstitial things I've ever run into. It exists in the space between all of the other stuff that has to go on. You need your subject matter experts. You need your structure, whether it's a hospital or an educational institution or whatever it is. But you need somebody who can pull that stuff together, who can speak those languages with those people, who has just enough information that they can say, I see you, I know what you're talking about. Here, get me the rest of the way. Here's something we can do. And then brings this whole new body of knowledge. And so as we keep developing that, what we have to do is keep advocating for ourselves. We have to keep standing up and saying, no, this is a real profession. No, this requires these things. We have formal education now. It's still growing. It's still new, but it's coming, right? We have obviously conferences. Yeah. We have a lot of people talking about this, and it's accreditation, certification, all of these things, and even accreditation that's being recognized outside of just the sim world, right? You can go to the American College of Surgeons, and there are 2 accreditations for sim from them. We've got lots of other organizations working on different things to say we're marrying these 2 things. We are now recognizing some skill in that. And so to that end, we have to keep pushing forward. And I will say that when I started in sim, it was really uncommon to see a director. This is 7.5 years ago, almost 8 years ago. It was really uncommon to see a director who didn't have a clinical background that matched the place that they were teaching.
Absolutely.
Or they were working.
And that's what they still want. A lot of places.
Many places.
You say
many
that,
places.
But let's not forget, we're in Phil's office. Phil has 0 clinical background. He has an AV background. Granted, he's got a long storied career in sim now.
Right.
But just like a lot of us, he fell into it. It wasn't intentional.
That's why I made him our first interview. Because I wanted to show people where you came from doesn't matter. You can really grow. You can really go places. That's why I want to interview. But that's relatively new. Like you said, like for the most part, for years, it was, hey, this person's a decent clinician with experience, so we're going to have them start teaching, and then they're going to learn to run the mannequin because they have to in order to continue this on. May not want to.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I won't go there.
Yeah, but that's where this started, right? For clinicians. Clinicians became educators.
Hey, here's this box in the closet. Put this thing together and figure it out.
And different levels of people embraced it in different ways. Right. My boss, basically, I think my former boss tonight was like found the mannequin and then just made the program himself and championed it forever. Yep. But some people get thrust upon them. And that's
I credit my first center with a lot of inadvertent inspiration.
Nice.
So I was at a medical school. We didn't have a single doctor in our department. Mm-hmm. We had a PA, we had a nurse. Our director had been an EMT on an OB ward in the Air Force maybe years before, but he had a master's in education, so he was kind of building that. We had a corpsman, we had an Army medic, and all these people had grown into different roles in this place. But I didn't know any different, right? Rolling into this, I didn't know that in the rest of the sim world, if you wanted to run a nursing center, you had to be a nurse. If you wanted to run most medical schools, you were going to be a physician. And so, I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing that. We're seeing the Phil Worthams of the world. We're seeing more and more people that are stepping into that.
Absolutely.
Paramedic by training, I've never been anywhere where I've actually directly worked at a center that supported paramedics until this one. And now it's super indirect, right? We work with the flight team a little bit here and there, but
I'd say another stumbling block is making the people, some places, making the people that you work with understand what your position is. Because I know that where in one of my jobs, I won't say which one, when I hired in, it was very obscure of what is this guy going to do? I thought we did this.
Right.
And, this is the education team. It was not their talent. It was not their skills, but they're having to do it all. But of course, then they're taking ownership. So it was almost an insult of who's this guy? Where is he coming from? Why is he doing this stuff? Right. And I come in how I am. I'm just like, I'm here to make your job easier. I'm here to facilitate this so that you're the talent. Go be talent and be awesome. And there was a power play of, taking, like they thought we were taking away things from them and stuff like that.
Sure. Go ahead.
So I guess, we've been talking back and forth on this one. Where would you draw the line? So again, we understand that some people work under different titles, right? It's not, just because you're listed as technician doesn't mean we think any less of you. But is the formal education going to be that cutoff, or is there going to be some other visible career path of when you hit these marks, now we see you as an ops specialist? I think it's going more that direction, but what is it? What are those steps?
And it may, but this is the same thing, and we talked about this in the pre-conversation. We should probably bring it up now, but there's so many parallels in paramedicine and EMS in this. So that's where they're trying to push that as 2-year degree. And because I'm actually a proponent of having Simtech, simulation operations specialists, and growing, because we're getting that in some of my places I interact with where, we call them a SimOps specialist. Why don't they know this stuff? Well, because we didn't have a SimOps specialist to hire. We hired somebody they don't know. We're training them still. And so, So
I think the thing that's going to drive that almost more than anything, though, is that fundamentally the simulation operations specialist exists in an academic setting. Even if it's hospital-based or whatever, it still arguably is kind of within that academic framework.
Okay.
And because of that, I think you're right. We will move towards a point at which degrees are a piece of that puzzle. And we see it lots of places where they're calling for a bachelor's degree, they're calling for an associate's degree or something like that. And that's often driven by HR. It's driven by, we can't pay them X, Y, or Z, or they can't have this title without a degree. But I think the thing that will really push it for us specifically in Sim is right now we don't have enough degree programs to support that move.
It's true.
I was talking with somebody about this the other day, and I don't know exactly how many graduates there are from I think we're now up to 6 or 7 varying stages of existence master's degree programs in Sim. I don't know how many we've graduated, but most of those programs have been around for, I think the oldest one was 8 years, but it closed 3 years in and I think just reopened. But most of those programs were 5 or 6 people per class.
Yeah, exactly.
So
no
we're talking
20.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're talking less than 100 people probably over the last 8 years that have been produced with that specific degree. So in the meantime, we kind of fall back to sort of that EMS model where it was more experience based. There's some skill set, right? We may say, they have to be able to X, Y, Z, but those things are either certifications, like simple ones, the SSH certifications, right, are 2 years minimum experience. That's something. Mm-hmm. A lot of people use that as a promotional thing. I have mixed feelings about that, but that's what a lot of people do. There's a lot of things where it just is based on your center. Once you can do X, Y, and Z, you can troubleshoot 3G all day long or, whatever. I think what we've done at my current center is we've done kind of a mix of those things. And we've kept the requirements somewhat low. That's an artifact of kind of how it's been building over time. But it's also to make those moves attainable in the near future until we start seeing more people coming in with those degrees, until we start seeing jobs that pay at a level that it's actually competitive for people that are coming in with that. So I think that's a big piece to the puzzle. I think the other thing, and we're on this tipping point, when you see big centers that have lots of stuff, or even little centers, but they have lots of stuff, that's the part where all of a sudden there is a recognition of some of the things that need to be taken off the plates of the people. And like you said before, jokingly, but it's real, it's cheaper,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You talk about nurse educators in some parts of the world are well into six figures. Having a six-figure person counting widgets maybe isn't the best use of our money. If we consider an operations specialist who we can pay much better than we are now even, but still maybe not hit six figures right out of the gates, they can become such a force multiplier because like you're saying, now the nurse educator, the doc, the whatever, paramedic goes out and teaches the skill set that they have. That person now can take care of the logistics, can take care of the operations, and they're going to have more experience opening up the mannequin, more comfort doing those things. They can have those conversations with the vendors or with the whomever that starting off, arguably, I was a paramedic, right? Yeah. I open up the mannequin. I'm like, I don't know, the spring is popping off of the flippy piece. I don't know, and then over time, you get that skill set. Yeah. We can do that through education or we can do it through experience. And so right now we're kind of in that funny spot.
So another conversation, and I don't know exactly how to word this correctly. So again, I'm trying to be nice about this. But you and I discussed this earlier. All three of us did. The idea that it doesn't always make sense for the tech and operations staff to answer directly to the educators. Does that have something to do with this professionalism at this level to say, you know what, we need technician operations staffs to basically have their own chain of command up to leadership versus answering almost to the education staff? Because the educators are doing one thing. We need to have that crossover. We need to be able to communicate. But at the end of the day, you don't work for me, right? There's no reason you should have to work for me. And so how do we do that? And does that in any way have something to do with kind of helping us move forward?
Sure. I think it's a good question. I haven't seen too many examples where the operations staff actually report to the educator. Okay. In an interesting way, that might make it easier than where we are now, where typically in most centers, because there aren't a lot of huge centers like campus, right, for instance, but typically it is more of a flat file, right? And the educators and the techs or the operations specialists or whatever all report to a similar layer, or maybe there's one layer and then, the top layer or something like that. And it's the bigger problem is really that false hierarchy, is that we've created this conceptual idea that an educator must necessarily come above an operations specialist. And it made sense in some sort of logical way early on when there wasn't this huge body of knowledge that comes with being an operations specialist. When we weren't saying, you got to know the tech, you got to know the theater part, you've got to know a little bit of the medicine, at least you've got to be able to put that stuff together. You've got to be able to speak to the education side of it and mix all these things together. Now, as that's growing, it makes less sense for that false hierarchy to be there, because now you have two people, arguably two positions, that are bringing so much to that table. And I think about, for instance, with my current center, to have the educators only responsible for developing that content, we miss out on so many opportunities. The number of scenarios that we had, the number of things that we've had at every place I've worked that had a scenario for a skills training, right? So an hour's worth of setup, 3G, all the bells and whistles, everything there, and we are going to have them walk in and catheterize that mannequin. Yep. And as opposed to then, if you bring in somebody with that logistics, that operational eye, that experience to say, hey, you know what? We've got 13 of these task trainers over here. We can get to your same objectives this way. Yeah. It'll take this much less time, this much whatever. And now we can do this with this other thing.
And basically have a whole classroom of people doing the same skill at the same time. And I guess, and you're right, I misworded that, but it's that false hierarchy that we were talking about earlier, right? Where we kind of have this imagined step system. But, again, I think you did a good job of answering that. How do we get away from that? And I think you're kind of onto the right steps there.
I think the other part is, and this is all love and respect to firefighters, paramedics, EMS, the whole mix. We took a long time to go from Johnny and Roy, cowboys, playing pranks in the firehouse, kind of growing as a profession, maturing a little bit. We still can do the pranks and things like that. Like there's definitely wiggle room that I support.
Still cook the occasional chicken,
for instance, right? Yeah. And
epic story.
And I think that's a little bit where we are now, where there is a certain pride that comes with being a tech or an operations specialist. There is a certain cowboy attitude, right? Like we will handle it. We will get it done. We will find an answer and we will do it well.
I tell people I love wearing the cape.
Yeah, right.
I just want to fly in, fix it, and fly out.
But as we keep establishing ourselves, as we keep performing consistently, as we keep being able to engage not only in the hands-on component, but also then in the knowledge component, in the integration of those things in that interstitial space, then we start to become not only truly consummate professionals such as we are, but we also become a recognized and an essential piece to any simulation program. From the taking the pressure off the educators so that they can best practices, right? So that they can observe and they can focus on the teaching and the assessment of the learners.
Yeah, work with them, gel, and that's the thing. You guys were talking about the different features of the mannequin. I mean, I'm thinking back to, I've got a scenario where they're talking about using SimMom for a death and dying. And I'm like, the problem is there's no eyelids. So how are you going to tell that the person's died? And I'm trying to express that to my educators. But yeah, so I mean, that's...
But same thing, right? Is
exactly.
To help people get there of... helping with the costs, right? Talking to my techs recently, we had a bunch of things where we were looking at buying X mannequin that's $35,000 or whatever it is, and we needed to buy 3 of them to send out, and that was going to be a big ask, right? After COVID, after all these things, that's logistically and financially maybe not irresponsible, but certainly it's going to be a push. Yeah. And then the techs actually came forward and they said, well, hold on a second. If all we want to use it for is this and this and this, what about this mannequin? It's $1,600. Mm-hmm. We could buy 12 of them and, still come out ahead in this game. And so all of a sudden, just that perspective, having that eye on something that maybe isn't the natural headspace for an educator or someone else to be in, because you're going to default to what you know best. If I know medicine best, or if I know clinical whatever best, that's going to be my primary lens. But if I know mannequins, if I know sim best, that's my primary lens. And that's where I think the operations specialist really shines.
No, I've had that experience too, and I know other techs have. We get new equipment and we're not read in on that sale at all, or even given advice. And we're like, this won't do the job. But we had no input.
Yep.
So the fact that we can grow our field to the point where we are asked, we're thought of as, well, these are the guys that have to do it. They should know it.
But high fidelity, right?
It's a great movie. I love it. It's a great John Cusack movie.
That's the thing, though, right? Is we fall into marketing traps at times, and I think that you're right. Sure. Having somebody who really can wade through the bullshit and say, hey, here's what I absolutely need.
Right.
Yeah.
And also somebody who can say, here's an alternate path to get us there, or here's the thing we already have, or absolutely, you're talking about fidelity. They're selling you technology. Yeah. Let's talk about fidelity. Let's find our way to get to exactly what we need for our level of learner.
What are your learning objectives?
Yep.
What are your learning objectives?
Right.
I have stickers for this.
Well, guys, I'm actually impressed. You both know I was nervous coming into this conversation.
You said no.
Well, I did. I shot this down. So again, I saw this quickly in my head devolving into an ambulance driver versus paramedic thing, right? Because we've dealt with that. All of us have, in that concept of, so you're an ambulance driver. No, I went to school for 2 years. I have a degree that says I went to school to become a paramedic. Granted, my degree came a few years after I became a paramedic, but there is a difference, right, between technician and clinician. And in this one, there is a difference between technician and specialist.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always come with the title, right? And that's the thing, is we got to make sure that people understand that in no way are we saying, hey, you're just a tech. That's never once been the thing that we're looking at. It's
Billy Pascal right now is just sitting there, cheering. I know, she's on the couch right now doing that.
Yeah.
And that's what I was telling you is, though, when I first heard the term, I'm just like laughable. I'm like, that's ridiculous. And I have come to understand that it means so much more. I've come to understand that we are in charge, an operations specialist is in charge of more. Like you said, I am going to just keep my eye on this equipment. Well, you're just playing on the internet looking at, new toys. No, I'm really trying to stay abreast on what is good, what we need in the industry, what we're going to need to meet our learning objectives. And if it doesn't fit here, I'm going to know for somebody else because I try to be a resource in our industry.
And I think one of the best parallels that you could come up with when we talk about an EMT, an emergency medical technician versus a paramedic, right, is with a technician versus a specialist. A technician is paid for what they can do. A specialist is paid for what they know.
Absolutely.
They're not going to use everything that they know every single time, but they are there to expand upon whatever is happening to kind of build that up. They can do all the stuff as well. And 90% of the time, a paramedic's call is a BLS call, right? You know, like that is just how it works. Probably a wrong percentage, but
no. But I feel like you give me a week, I can take anyone off the street and teach them to do all of the physical skills that a paramedic has to do on their day-to-day. I mean, people can get as pissed as they want. It's not that hard to intubate. It's not that hard to start an IV. What I really need is someone who understands the underlying physiology,
clinical decision making.
And you can't. That comes with experience.
Right.
You don't get to just pull someone off the street, say, "Hey, here's how you intubate," and then cut them loose because they're not going to know when to do it or why they're doing it.
Tons of EMTs that I would pick all day long.
Oh my God.
For their experience and their ability to clinically reason. Right.
Like, and I was going to say that because
that scope of practice is a separate question.
Oh my God.
They may have that knowledge and skill and
so many talented EMTs. I mean, and it drives me crazy when I've been working as a paramedic, and we were working an event, and this person that was supposedly in charge snubbed my EMT, and I was furious, and I gave them another chance. By the way, this is my EMT. He was like, "Well, you're the paramedic." I'm like, and that person was dead to me at that point. So no, that's why I'm glad you put that up, because we love our EMTs. The skill set and the understanding, the reasoning is so important. So the Simtechs and the things like that are so important.
Right.
But you said it's the wide angle. It's going from a tight angle lens of knowing data and knowing how to do the job to the wide angle of applying the knowledge to better suit and the position. And again, it's to you, the educator. I'm there to make your job easier. I'm there to help you, supplement you. Let's work this together. So. All right.
Nice. Well, I think we did a decent job of kind of wrapping it up and coming back without burning anyone to the ground or getting ourselves in hot water.
We'll find out in the comments, right?
Exactly. And give us your comments. Give us your ideas. Give us your love, your hate, whatever.
Well, guys, so this is our second recording that we've done here live. It won't be live for you guys. It'll be recorded, right? Because it's a podcast. But from SimOps here at Camels in Tampa. And we have a few other things that we're going to be doing over the next couple of days. We're going to be pushing a lot of content out. And so feel free to reach out. Let us know what you guys are looking for. If you have suggestions, if there's something here that you want to see, and we'll try and work through it and try and fit it in.
Topics or anything like that. Give us the ideas. Give us the, we only want to do this for you. We want to know what you want. So by all means, reach out, and we love the interaction. So.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Dude, we've been trying this for 2 years. We've been trying to get you on. I'm pretty stoked about this. So this cannot be the last time, and it certainly can't be another 2 years. I think this was good, and we have plenty of other things we could talk about.
I'm in.
I appreciate your time. You were a very busy dude, so important dude.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Take care.